Last time on My Evil Stepfather and His 5 Daughters. After preparing a delicious meal for himself and his wife Cindy, Raymond collapsed in the kitchen while doing the dishes. Screaming in agony, his children and wife rushed to his side only to find him on the kitchen floor, twisting in pain. The ambulance was called, and he was rushed to the nearest hospital, where it was revealed he had ingested a dangerous substance that could be fatal. Now that we've gotten you up to speed, let's continue this story. After the doctor left, Carol stepped away to a private area in the hospital and phoned her husband, Mr. Smith. He arrived at the hospital about an hour later with some officers and a mystery man in handcuffs to confront and question Raymond and his 5 daughters about the poisoning incident. After a series of questions, Raymond denied any knowledge of how the poisoning happened, as did his daughters. The room was filled with tension. It was at that moment Mr. Smith asked the officer to escort the mystery man inside Raymond's hospital room. With a look of unease and fear on Raymond's face, it was evident that he was familiar with the face he saw. With a trembling voice, Raymond muttered, "Who is this, and what is he doing in my hospital room?" With grievance and malice etched across the faces of Carol and Mr. Smith, the officers stepped in to commence the questioning. Standing among the officers was Raymond's childhood friend, Christopher. The person who had been a witness and accomplice in Raymond's life of deceit and treachery for decades. Christopher's presence sparked memories of their past, revealing a dark and twisted history between them both. As the officer prompted Christopher to recount the story he told them before being brought in front of Raymond, before Christopher could speak, he was interrupted by Raymond's ranting. In an outburst, Raymond angrily said, "Who is this man? I do not know him. Get him out of my room this minute." With a stern and harsh tone, Mr. Smith quieted Raymond, asking him to remain silent for his own good. As Christopher began his tales of his story, he went back to the beginning, starting with Raymond's first wife, Louisa. Raymond and his first wife, Louisa, were childhood sweethearts. They both grew up in the small community just a few houses apart from each other. It wasn't long before their friendship blossomed into love, and they wedded at the young age of 19. Louisa got pregnant some months after, which changed their lives forever. Now they had another mouth to feed. Raymond, struggling to provide, sought the help of his parents, who helped him with the little they could to start up a business. Louisa's parents also contributed to Raymond and their daughter's business. Though the business was only generating small profits, it was still enough to care for their growing family. 7 years went by, and Raymond and Louisa's family grew. They were now a family of 7 with 5 daughters. The financial struggles they faced during this time were immense. Caring for 5 children wasn't an easy task, and their marriage suffered as a result. With mounting debts, Raymond struggled to provide for his wife and daughters due to bad investments. One day, he paid Christopher a visit, complaining bitterly about his financial woes and needing a way out of the crisis he was in. They discussed for a while, and Raymond came up with the idea of eliminating his wife, Louisa, so he could receive her life insurance money. Though taken aback at the coldness in Raymond's voice towards a woman who had loved him for the past decade, Christopher kept quiet because he knew too well how dangerous Raymond was and the extent he'd go to for $1. Christopher discloses the shocking truth. He and Raymond eventually conspired to terminate Louisa for insurance money. Raymond's greed led him to target Louisa, and Christopher helped execute the deadly plan by providing the poison that he'd be using in Louisa's food daily, gradually eating away at her little by little until she eventually dies. With Raymond's devilish plan in motion, Louisa was given a small amount of poison in her meals daily. She became sick as the weeks turned into months. Louisa became weaker with each doctor visit, with no medical diagnosis. She would return home each time until eventually she succumbed to her unknown illness. Pretending to be the loving husband, grief-stricken, he shed a few tears and grieved for a while before he packed up and moved away from the home he once shared with Louisa, taking the 5 girls with him. Louisa's family understood his decision to move away from the place that reminded him of his late wife, and they fully supported him. With Louisa out of the way, and Raymond and his 5 daughters relocated to the city, he collected the life insurance policy he had on Louisa and rented a nice apartment for himself and his daughters. He invested in a new business, which afforded him a lifestyle he always wanted to live. Raymond, the pretentious imposter, dined among the elites while he looked for his next catch. For a while, he met a few women who he got a small amount of money from to keep his lifestyle afloat by promising them love. After he got what he wanted, he'd break up with them and move to the next victim. A few years went by, and Raymond set his sights on Cindy, whom he met at a business conference. With his pretentious lifestyle and his growing need to keep up the facade, he needed a new catch, and this time, Cindy was the target. He tried everything he could that day to get her attention, but Cindy didn't give him a listening ear. He knew Cindy wouldn't be like the other women who were easily convinced when he professed his fake love. So, he devised another plan to win Cindy over, but he'd need the help of his best friend Christopher for his plans to work flawlessly. Christopher recounted that fateful day he received a call from Raymond asking him to spy on Cindy and gather information that he could use to win her over. Christopher agreed and got to work. He surveilled Cindy for some weeks and had enough information to bring back to Raymond, at which point he'd collect his small payment for the job he did. Armed with this new information, Raymond swung into motion. His ulterior motive was to marry Cindy and exploit her wealth, setting the stage for a sinister plot. He pursued Cindy relentlessly, showering her with gifts, and would occasionally surprise her with lunch dates and romantic dinners. Yet still, Cindy didn't accept to be Raymond's woman, but this didn't deter him. He agreed to be friends with Cindy, to which she happily accepted, not wanting to lose the friendship she had built with Raymond. Christopher recounts how Raymond's manipulation continued for an entire year until he gradually gained her trust and affection. Eventually, Cindy accepted to be with him. After a year and a half of dating, Raymond proposed, and they were set to marry. Though Cindy's mother kicked against the relationship, her motherly instinct not trusting Raymond's genuine intentions towards her daughter. This infuriated Raymond as he made plans to eliminate Cindy's mother Agatha if she didn't stop interfering in his relationship with Cindy. But luckily for Agatha, Cindy didn't listen to her, and she went ahead and married Raymond even against her mother's warnings. After the marriage, Raymond and his 5 daughters moved into Cindy's mansion with her only daughter, Raina. Things went well for a while as the new blended family was excited for their new journey together. Raina was especially happy to have sisters. After some months, it was time for Raymond to start activating the plans he had in motion before he married Cindy. He would often approach Cindy about investing a large amount in his numerous businesses, assuring her that she could turn great profits if she invested a hefty amount. Cindy would always tell him she'll think about it, but when he'd revisit, she'd back out, citing an uneasy feeling about the business not being a good option for her to invest. As the years went by, this continued. Though Cindy gave Raymond some money for himself to invest in his own business, this didn't sit well with Raymond, citing that the money was too little. This became an issue as he began to have regular quarrels with Cindy over these investment issues. Raymond's failed attempts to siphon money from Cindy's accounts led to frustration and desperation. He would often complain his displeasure to Christopher and think of other ways he could get money from her without her knowing. Raymond's latest scheme involved convincing Cindy to invest in dubious oil business ventures, which she repeatedly declined. Frustrated by Cindy's refusal to comply, Raymond turned to Christopher for a deadly solution. He was tired of waiting around for Cindy to change her mind. Christopher reveals how he tampered with Cindy's car brakes on the request of Raymond, intending to stage a car accident to rid himself of her, to which he'd have access to her account since she didn't sign a prenuptial agreement before their marriage. One morning, as Cindy hugged and kissed her daughter Raina and her stepdaughters goodbye, she headed out to work where she got into an accident on the highway. Cindy's accident was meticulously orchestrated by Christopher, tailing her on that fateful morning. Minutes after the crash, Christopher rushed over to Cindy's side. Though trapped in the car, she was still conscious and begged Christopher to help her. But instead of rendering help, he injected her with a medicine that would wipe her memory. When other motorists rushed over to assist Cindy, Christopher hurriedly tucked away the needle and pretended to be helping Cindy. When the emergency personnel arrived on the scene, they asked Christopher to step aside so they could help Cindy out of the car and check her for any injuries. It was at this moment Christopher planned to pose as her devoted husband. Cindy was unconscious upon arrival at the hospital, the doctors rushing to her. While assessing her, she woke up but was screaming at the doctors, confused. They concluded that the car accident caused trauma to her brain, which she's now suffering from memory loss, which could be temporary or permanent. But for the moment, they needed to put her into an induced coma for the swelling on her brain to reduce. They asked for a next of kin contact because someone needed to sign and agree to these procedures. Christopher fabricated his identity as Cindy's husband, with a new name. He didn't hesitate in giving consent, telling them Cindy's name was Celeste. Cindy was in and out of a coma for a year, and the entire time Christopher's manipulation continued as he implanted false memories in Cindy's mind, shaping her new identity as his wife. 3 years passed with Cindy being in the hospital, to which even Raymond was unaware of Christopher's double cross. All this time, Raymond thought Cindy was vanquished, but his best friend Christopher had his own plans for Cindy. You see, what Raymond himself didn't know was that his best friend Christopher and partner in crime had fallen deep in love with Cindy after Raymond hired him to surveil her for some months. He had always harbored these feelings inside him, knowing he couldn't act on them since she was already being marked to be Raymond's next victim. He waited for an opportunity for Raymond to ask him to discard Cindy so he could capitalize on Raymond thinking she's no more to put his own plans in motion. Though he knew she would never have anything to do with him, he had a plan B, which was to wipe her memory so he can create a new life as husband and wife for them both. With a marriage certificate and new birth certification documents, everything was in place. All he needed to do was be patient until the doctors released her, knowing Raymond would never look for her because he's under the impression that Cindy was no more. Christopher had nothing to worry about. Cindy, now Celeste, unaware of her true past, even forgetting her only child Raina, now living in a fabricated reality crafted by Christopher, started to accept her new reality, with no memory of her past and Christopher providing some fake documents such as her passport and ID with the name Celeste. She fell for the deception. Christopher's deception deepened as he gave Celeste a ring, signifying their union and love, solidifying his control over her life. Days after Christopher gave Celeste the ring, Raymond beckoned him once more, needing his assistance with providing the deadly substance he used on his first wife Louisa. He once again wanted Christopher to help him clean up his mess. He prompted Christopher to meet him at his home ASAP, to which he agreed, stating he'd be there in a few hours. Some hours later, Christopher showed up and handed Raymond the substance and left. Raymond wasted no time in adding the substance to Cindy's meal after he dished and placed it on the dining table. This way, he could end Cindy and cover up all his atrocities he committed while Cindy been away. Confused and puzzled as to how Cindy survived the accident that was rigged to be fatal, he had checked the car himself after Christopher tampered with the brakes. Her reappearance had him in a panic so much so that he forgot to mention that the person he wanted to use the lethal poison on was Cindy. It slipped his mind to mention to Christopher that Cindy has resurfaced. He still wonders how it was possible that she survived, but he would pay no mind to that as she would be out of his life for good soon after eating the meal he was preparing. Christopher confessed to being tired of being the henchman who Raymond calls on to eliminate the people around him that fell victim to his insatiable greed. While Raymond enjoyed a life of luxury in Cindy's mansion, he's still struggling to make ends meet. With the meager amount Raymond pays him, he could barely afford his rent. It was in that moment he made the decision to take out the infamous Raymond. He plotted and came up with his own plans. The substance he gave Raymond was not actually lethal but would just cause slight stomach discomfort. Instead, he had a drink with Raymond outside before he handed him the substance. It was then that he slipped a large amount of the poison into Raymond's drink, masking it with each pour of the liquor. Before long, Raymond left and went home, acting as if nothing happened. Everyone's jaws dropped at Christopher's revelation of Raymond's murderous intentions, shocking everyone present, especially his daughters, who mourned their mother's death anew. With the truth exposed, Carol stepped forward to reveal her true identity as Cindy's twin sister, Carol. She had taken on this risky task after Raina showed up at her home as a maid but recognized her face as that of her mother, Cindy. The truth was uncovered as they located both Carol and Cindy's mother, Agatha, in the country, who confirmed them being identical twin sisters. After returning from the country, they used the help of local law enforcement and private investigators to wiretap the entire house to surveil Raymond and his 5 daughters, fearing the worst that he may have a hand in Cindy's disappearance for the past 4 years. With the hateful and cruel way Raymond and his children treated Raina, Carol's undercover mission had to be impeccable in order to be successful in uncovering Raymond's crimes, providing crucial evidence for his impending arrest. Christopher's detailed confession corroborated Carol's testimony, ensuring Raymond would face justice for his many crimes. Along with recordings and video evidence of Raymond sprinkling what he thought was poison in Carol's food, who Raymond thought was Cindy at the time. Raymond's daughters grappled with the harrowing reality of their father's actions, facing the consequences of his greed and betrayal. The realization dawned on them that their beloved father, who had misled them into maltreating Raina, someone who had done no wrong to them, was actually the same person who robbed them of the chance to grow up with their mother. And he even wanted to end the life of their stepmother, who had been nothing but kind to them, all because of money. In shame, his 2 oldest daughters, Aisha and Kira, ran out of the hospital, pained and embittered by the revelation, while the 3 youngest stayed back, crying and questioning why their father was so evil. As Raymond lay in the hospital, his once deceptive facade crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable to the law's retribution. Though still in a critical state, Raymond was put under 24-hour watch by the authorities. His phone was confiscated for further evidence, and he was restricted from receiving visitors. With regrets, he begged for forgiveness from his children and Carol, but neither his children nor Carol was ready to listen to him. He had no excuse but greed. He would have destroyed anyone in his way to acquire wealth by any means. With Cindy's location now revealed, it was time to wipe their tears and gather the family to go see Cindy. As Carol fell into the arms of her husband, Mr. Smith, she wept, a sigh of relief yet uncertainty as to the fate of her twin sister. As Mr. Smith comforted his wife, he took her home to see her mother and niece and to share the revelations with them and the good news that though Cindy had memory loss, she was still alive. Mr. Smith and Carol got back to their home, and Raina ran to embrace them with big smiles on her face, welcoming them home as she sat down beside her grandmother, Agatha, waiting for her aunt and uncle to give her updates on her mother's location. As Carol narrated the entire story of what took place at the hospital after Raymond's attempts to poison her failed but was poisoned by his best friend, Christopher, instead, the poisoning and the dark deeds of his past unraveled, as his best friend and accomplice had been apprehended nearby by the authorities after he was caught on recordings and videos at the house a few times discussing some questionable businesses. He was offered a plea deal to turn on Raymond, and he didn't hesitate. Agatha and Raina were shocked. Raina shook her head, stating she always knew Raymond was no good, still in a state of shock that she had been living with such a dangerous family all these years. As her grandmother embraced her, she wondered if she had put aside her issues with Cindy and went visiting if she could have saved at least her granddaughter Raina from the hardships she endured in her father's home. Raina, through her tears, assured her grandmother that there's nothing she could have done differently. She tried her best to get her mother, Cindy, to see, but Raymond had played his cards right. She was over Raymond and his 5 evil daughters. She was just curious about the fate of her mother, Cindy. As Carol and Mr. Smith shared the news of Cindy's location, Raina jumped up off her seat in excitement, asking if they could go there now. She longed for the warm embrace of her mother. 4 years is a long time to miss her beloved mother. The family packed up and drove to the hospital to see Cindy, for at last, their prayers had been answered, she was alive. Now that Raymond's dark deeds had been exposed, and he's gonna go to prison for the rest of his life once he recovers from the poisoning that should have claimed his life, as intended by his best friend and accomplice, Christopher, what will be the fate of his 5 daughters? Share your thoughts. Do you think Cindy will regain her memory upon seeing her daughter or her reflection in the face of her twin sister, Carol? Share your thoughts in the comment sections. Remember to like this video, subscribe, turn the notifications bell on to be notified each time a new video is uploaded. Stay tuned for the concluding part of this story. Your engagement means a lot to us. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.